It began on a Tuesday. The clouds hung heavy over the hills of rural Croatia. The wind whispered across fields as if repeating a secret the earth could no longer hold. There, just beyond the edge of a forgotten village, stood an old stone chapel. Unnoticed, abandoned by most. Its bell hadn't rung in decades. Vines curled around its walls. The roof sagged under the weight of time. But every Tuesday, Father Luka climbed the hill. He was 76. A retired priest. Alone. Grieving. But faithful. His brother had died in the war. His nephew, whom he raised like a son, had succumbed to cancer. His voice, once strong from the pulpit, was now a soft whisper in his prayers. Yet every week, without fail, he returned to the crumbling chapel. Not to preach, but to pray. Not for revival, but for remembrance. That morning, something strange happened. As he stepped into the chapel, a white feather floated through the cracked ceiling and landed on the altar. He picked it up slowly and murmured, "Speak, Lord. I am listening." Moments later, the ground roared. A sudden earthquake tore through the hillside. Stones screamed, beams cracked, and in a moment, the chapel was no more, collapsed in on itself, a graveyard of history. Beneath the rubble, Luka was pinned. He couldn't move, could barely breathe, but he did not panic. Instead, he closed his eyes and whispered, "Even here, I am not forsaken." That night, in the cold and dark, Luka heard a voice, not from above, but within. It said, "Sing." And so, broken and bleeding, he obeyed. A trembling melody rose. "It is well with my soul." The sound was weak, but defiant. A song of survival. A declaration of faith. 3 miles away, a teenage boy named Emil wandered through the forest. He had run away after his father told him he was a mistake. Emil was angry, hopeless, done with life. But then, he heard something. Faint, fragile. A song in the distance, carried by the wind. He followed it. Through thorns and mist, he moved toward the sound, drawn not by logic, but by something deeper. Hunger. When he reached the ruins, he stopped. His heart stilled. A metal cross stood upright in the wreckage. Unbroken. Untouched. Shining like a sword against the dusk. And beneath it, the song still came. He dug. With bare hands. For hours. Until a voice rose from beneath the stones. "You're the one," Luka whispered. "You heard it." Rescuers arrived. Luka was saved. But that was only the beginning. As rubble was cleared, a hidden chamber was discovered beneath the altar. Inside, a wooden chest sealed in wax. Within it, a scorched olive wood cross. And an ancient parchment. The message was a prophecy. From the voice of the buried, the flame shall return. The wanderer shall build what the earth breaks. And the cross shall stand where none believe it can. 2 days later, Emil returned to the site. He felt something pulling him back. While walking through the ruins alone, he spotted a sealed envelope in the rubble, dry, unburned, untouched. It had his name on it. Inside was a letter. The handwriting, unfamiliar. The message, impossible. "You were not lost. You were led. Build again, and I will meet you every Tuesday on this hill." It was unsigned, except for one word, Abba. The story reached nearby towns. Pilgrims began visiting the hill. One day, an elderly woman named Mira arrived. She wept the moment she saw Luka and Emil together. She told them she had seen this moment years before. She went home and returned with a painting, dusty and torn, from her attic. In it, the same hill, the same chapel in ruins, and 2 figures, an old priest beneath a cross, and a young man kneeling beside him. She had painted it 17 years before the quake. After a dream that haunted her ever since. She never understood it, until now. 1 month later, the chapel was rebuilt. Smaller. Simpler. But alive. At its dedication service, Luka asked a 10-year-old girl named Lida to carry the olive wood cross to the altar. She had been born with a spinal condition. Doctors said she would never walk. But as she rose to take the cross, something happened. She walked. 1 step. Then another. Gasps filled the chapel. Luka fell to his knees. Emil wept openly. It wasn't just a miracle. It was a sign that what had risen from the rubble wasn't just a building. It was a move of God. Today, the Chapel of the Cross stands as a sanctuary for the forgotten. People from every nation come, not to remember tragedy, but to witness restoration. At its altar hangs the olive wood cross, and carved into the stone beneath it, your voice still carries. Your ruins still matter. And even from beneath the rubble, God still speaks. And every Tuesday at sunrise, a bell rings. Not because someone pulls the rope, but because hope still echoes from the hill. They say some places hold memory like stone holds warmth from the sun. That chapel, once forgotten, became a place where prayers didn't just rise, they returned. Each Tuesday, without fail, people gather before dawn. Some come with questions. Others with grief. Some bring only silence. But all come for one reason, to feel what cannot be explained. And every time as the bell tolls, it feels as if heaven leans just a little closer. Father Luca, now older and walking slower, still climbs the hill when he can. When he can't, Emile helps him, arm wrapped around the man who once lay buried under the very ground they now stand on. Emile never went back to the life he had before. He chose instead to stay, to serve, to rebuild, not just the chapel but lives. He began training to become a lay minister, leading youth groups, organizing retreats, and visiting orphan children who reminded him of himself. One day, years after the quake, Emile found himself standing in front of a packed chapel. Luca had asked him to give the homily. He hesitated, unsure he was worthy. But Luca smiled and said, "Sometimes the most broken voices carry the clearest truth." So Emile stepped up to the pulpit, cleared his throat and said, "I came here lost. I thought I had no voice, no name, no future. But God knew exactly where to find me. He used rubble to rebuild me, a storm to steady me, and a song to save me. You may not feel ready. You may feel buried by shame, fear, or failure. But I promise you, God still hears from beneath the rubble." The room was silent. And then the bell rang once, soft, perfect, unprompted. Later, as the service ended, a woman approached with tears in her eyes. Her son had run away weeks before. No contact. No note. She was ready to give up. Emile gently placed the old feather, kept in a frame near the altar, into her hand and said, "He may be lost, but he's not forgotten." A week later, her son returned. More stories followed. A soldier healed from trauma after hearing a recording of Luca's hymn. A widow who had lost all hope saw her husband's name carved faintly into one of the chapel's beams, his handwriting unmistakable from a letter she thought was lost. A man on the brink of suicide sat on the chapel steps and watched as a child who had once been paralyzed played with others in the field below. They all came looking for something. What they found was him. And still, the bell rings, on clear mornings and stormy nights. Without rope, without hands, without reason. Except one. To remind the world that even in silence, even in rubble, even in ruins, hope still speaks. And those who are willing to listen will hear. Years passed. The story of the chapel spread far beyond the hills of Croatia. Pilgrims came from as far as South Korea, Nigeria, Argentina, drawn not by a tourist brochure or a famous miracle, but by whispers. A nurse said she heard the hymn in a hospital room after a child flatlined. A prisoner claimed the feather from the altar appeared in his cell the night he cried out for mercy. No one could explain these things. They simply were. And still, each Tuesday, the hill breathed with quiet expectancy. People came with crutches, and left without them. Others came with bitterness, and left singing. But the most extraordinary day came 10 years to the hour after the earthquake. The weather that morning was restless. Wind howled through the forest, rain scattered like dust. Emile, now 30, stood inside the chapel lighting candles, preparing to open the doors. Father Luca had gone home to God 6 months earlier, his final breath taken at sunrise, on a Tuesday. That morning, Emile placed Luca's old wooden cane at the foot of the cross and whispered, "You kept the light burning." Then the storm outside stopped. Abruptly, as if the heavens had paused. He opened the chapel doors. Outside stood hundreds of people, families, strangers, Children who had once been sick now grown and healthy. Some held photos. Others held nothing. All were quiet. And then it happened. The bell rang. Not once. Not twice. But 7 times. No wind. No hands. Just the sound echoing across the hills like a call to arms. The cross on the altar trembled slightly, not in fear, but in power. And among the crowd, a young man in a dark coat stepped forward. His eyes were familiar. Emil blinked. His breath caught. It was Luca's nephew, the one thought lost to cancer. But here he was. Alive. He walked forward slowly and said, "They told me I died. But I remember waking up in a hospital in Italy. Alone. No name. No past. Until 2 months ago when I saw a photo of this chapel, and I knew. I had to come home." Emil embraced him, eyes filled with tears. Around them, people wept openly, worshipping not the place, but the presence. That night, as the stars returned and the candle flames danced, Emil stood once more at the altar. He placed Luca's old prayer book next to the olive-wood cross. Pages marked. Corners torn. A single feather tucked between Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. He looked out over the people, now more family than strangers. And in a voice once uncertain, now full of fire, Emil said, "We were never just rebuilding a chapel. We were unearthing a promise. That nothing, not time, not death, not disaster, can bury the will of God. That rubble is not the end. That your ruin is not your grave." And from the hill that once held silence and stone, rose a sound not even the earthquake could bury. A song. For many voices. One hymn. It is well with my soul. And as the stars wheeled above, the bell rang one last time that night. Not as a warning, but as a witness. That hope, once buried, now leaves. Years passed. The chapel on the hill became more than a sacred site. It became a meeting place between heaven and earth. No sign announced it. No roads were paved to it. And yet, they kept coming. Mothers with terminal children, broken men with hidden sins, widows with folded letters of prayers unanswered. One Tuesday morning, a strange visitor arrived. He wore an old monk's robe and leaned heavily on a walking stick carved with symbols no one could read. He stayed silent for hours, walking through the chapel, kneeling at the stone wall, touching the beams. Then he approached Emil and said, "This place carries a wound that sings. But it is not finished." Before Emil could speak, the man handed him a small, sealed vial of oil. "Use it," he said, "when the shadow comes." Then he turned and walked down the hill, disappearing into the mist. Emil kept the vial, unsure what it meant. Months later, as winter drew near, tragedy struck. A fire from a nearby forest swept toward the hill. People tried to stop it. They prayed. But the wind was wild. Flames climbed fast. The chapel, wood, stone, and stained glass, stood directly in the path. They thought it would be lost. Emil ran inside, opened the little vial, and poured the oil along the threshold. Then he knelt and said only 4 words. "Lord, not this flame." The fire approached, but as it reached the hilltop, it split. Left and right, like hands parting water. The entire chapel was spared. Not even the grass beneath it burned. Scientists could not explain it. But the people knew. A week later, while restoring the field around the chapel, workers uncovered a slab of stone buried deep beneath the roots of an ancient tree. On it were etched words in 3 languages, Hebrew, Latin, and Croatian. Together they formed one sentence. "When the last shall sing, the end becomes beginning." No one understood it, until the day a girl who had been born without a voice stood before the congregation and, for the first time in her life, sang aloud. But perfect pitch. The words she sang? The very hymn Lucas sang in the rubble. "It is well." They say the wind outside stopped to listen. Years later, as Emil grew older, he would often sit at the back of the chapel while others led the service. His hair had turned silver. His hands were weathered, marked by time, by work, by miracles. One rainy Tuesday morning, a little boy tugged at his sleeve. Emile looked down, smiling. The boy held up a small notebook. Inside were drawings, one of a chapel on fire, another of a feather, and one of an old man buried under stones. Emile asked, "Where did you see these?" The boy replied, "I dream about them. Every Tuesday night. Then I wake up singing." Emile's eyes welled with tears. It was happening again. Not repeating, but continuing. Because this was never just one story. It was always a beginning. A holy echo passed down in voices, in feathers, in flames and rubble and song. And so the story closes, not in silence, but in sound. The sound of a bell ringing by no hand. The sound of footsteps on the hill at dawn. The sound of a song too ancient to be new and too personal to be forgotten. And somewhere beyond sight, where clouds touch the edge of heaven, Father Luca smiles. Because even now, long after the stones have settled and the chapel has stood through storms, the truth remains. Hope does not end in the ground. It rises. Again and again. For those who dare to listen and sing.